She's so fine. Hell of a, blows my mind. Hell of a, lights my day.
What's good, guys? Today is Wednesday, December the 30th, 2020. Just a few more days left in this raggedy year. It's a rainy day here in Kentucky. I'm going to ask that you go ahead and smash that subscribe button if you haven't already. I wanted to bring this story to the channel. I read the story last night around 8:30ish. It's coming from the Washington Post, but they've since done an update roughly about 6 minutes ago. It's titled, Louisville Police Moved to Fire 2 More Officers Involved in Raid That Killed Breonna Taylor. Louisville Police on Tuesday moved to fire 2 officers involved in the fatal raid on Breonna Taylor's home in a bid for more accountability in the tragedy that ignited the country last summer amid a broader racial justice movement. Detective Joshua James, who was responsible for the no-knock search warrant, received a pre-termination letter Tuesday, according to a copy of the missive shared by local news outlets. The department is also seeking to terminate Detective Miles Cosgrove, the officer who, an FBI ballistics report concluded, fired the shot that proved fatal to Taylor, according to the New York Times and several local news outlets. Jane's pre-termination letter from Interim Chief Yvette Gentry accuses him of breaching department policies around truthfulness and preparing for a warrant's execution. Among other alleged violations, Gentry wrote that Janes, quote, lied, end quote, in writing the warrant application that he verified through a U.S. postal inspector that Taylor was receiving packages related to her ex-boyfriend's alleged drug activity. Quote, these are extreme violations of our policies which endangered others, Gentry wrote in the letter. Your actions have brought discredit upon yourself and the department, end quote. Attorneys for Janes and Cosgrove did not immediately respond to inquiries from the Washington Post. Thomas Clay, an attorney for Janes, told the Courier-Journal, which is our state newspaper, that he and his client plan to contest the attempted termination at a hearing tomorrow. If Janes and Cosgrove are fired, they will become the second and third officers terminated in relation to the raid on Taylor's home, joining previously terminated officer Brett Hankinson. Kentucky's AG Daniel Cameron charged Hankinson in September with 3 counts of wanton endangerment for shots he fired that entered a neighboring apartment. He has pleaded not guilty. The accusation that Janes lied to obtain the warrant also raises questions about the validity of the raid, which has fueled frequent protests since it happened in March. No one was directly charged in Taylor's killing, although the FBI continues to investigate whether any officers violated federal civil rights laws. A spokesperson for Cameron did not immediately reply to questions about whether the AG will take any action in response to Gentry's conclusions about Jane's behavior. A spokesperson for Louisville Metro Police also did not reply to a message seeking comment on the attempted terminations. Gentry's letter to Janes labels as, quote, not truthful, end quote, his statement on the warrant application that he had, quote, verified through a U.S. postal inspector, end quote, that Taylor's ex-boyfriend, Jamarcus Glover, was receiving packages at her home. Janes did not actually talk with a postal inspector, but instead received information through a chain of communication that included a fellow officer involved in the raid and another Kentucky Police Department an investigation found. Janes also lied by writing on the warrant application that a postal inspector had advised him that Glover was getting packages at Taylor's apartment, Gentry's letter alleges. The chief also took aim at James' preparation for the raid, saying he should have implemented, quote, better controls, supervision, and scrutiny, end quote. James conducted most of the investigation that led to the raid, so he or one of his supervisors should have been present when the warrant was carried out, Gentry wrote. Quote, because the operations plan was not completed properly, a very dangerous situation was created for all parties involved, end quote, the letter says. In a department-wide email obtained by the Courier-Journal, Gentry wrote that the attempted firings was a result of a, quote, nearly completed, end quote, internal investigation into whether any of the officers involved in Taylor's death violated the force's policies. Quote, I had to make some tough decisions, she wrote. I do, however, believe I was fair, and I intend to take all mitigating factors into consideration. I believe my decisions have placed the responsibility for the actions taken in this case upon the shoulders of the people who I believe are responsible, end quote. Attorneys for Taylor's family on Wednesday called for Janes and Cosgrove to be criminally charged, in addition to being fired. Quote, there is no revelation here, end quote. Attorneys Ben Crump, Sam Aguiar, and Lanita Baker said in a statement. We've known since Bree's killing that her death was a direct result of the lies, corruption, and complete malfeasance of the Louisville Metro Police Department. We applaud the diligent efforts of Chief Gentry, who stepped in to investigate the events surrounding Breonna Taylor's murder and not simply defer to the incompetence of the Attorney General's office, end quote. Calls for a new prosecutor to examine the killing of Taylor, a 26-year-old emergency room tech, have so far been denied. A.G. Cameron, who handled the case after a local prosecutor recused himself, has defended himself against criticism that his investigation was biased in favor of his fellow law enforcement officers. His responsibility was to ask only for indictments that his office could prove, he said in October. 2 anonymous grand jurors in the case have publicly alleged that Cameron's office refused to give them all the evidence they requested and have said a new prosecutor should be appointed. A 3rd anonymous juror said they supported the fact that, quote, no additional charges were allowed, end quote, beyond the wanton endangerment charges. Taylor's killing came in the early morning hours of March the 13th when several officers arrived at her apartment and knocked several times. While the officers claim they announced themselves as police, several neighbors and Taylor's boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, dispute that. Walker fired one shot with a gun he legally owned, striking Sergeant Jonathan Mattingly in the leg, after officers broke down the door with a battering ram. Walker has said he thought the officers were intruders. Mattingly and Cosgrove shot back, and Taylor was hit 6 times. Shots fired by Hankison, who fired from outside the home, are not believed to have struck Taylor. I want to go back to this. That's the end of the article. I want to go back to this. It's awful funny to me, and I mean funny as in coincidental, that of all the times you have someone who legally owned their firearm in their home, they allege they never heard the police announcing police. The neighbors are also saying the same thing. Do I believe them? Absolutely. I absolutely do. I'm very familiar with Kentucky law enforcement. And you have a homeowner who was protecting his castle. And we can take it all the way back to medieval times, the castle law. He was protecting his home. He fired shot in protection of his home. And the National Rifle Association never came out one time and said anything about that. Come on with the jokes, man. That's crazy to me. The NRA has never made a comment about this case. That has always puzzled me. But yet they'll stand up for other BS. And I also do want to mention that this Sergeant Jonathan Mattingly, he actually has several ties to the area where I'm from. I believe his grandfather was a fire department chief locally, and he also has an uncle that is in EMS. So he has a long history of that type of service employment. I'm going to end the article there, but I did want to bring this to the channel because it is important. But it is also important to note that no one has been charged criminally in this case. And I'm going to end the video on that note. Thanks for watching, guys. I appreciate your time.